An explosion at a police station in Turkey near the border with Syria has reportedly killed at least 11 people and wounded 70. State-run media is reporting that Kurdish militants were responsible for the attack, but there's been no claim of responsibility. This comes as the Turkish military has sent additional tanks into northern Syria, intensifying its ground offensive in the ongoing conflict. The U.S. military is backing Turkey's incursion, which began earlier this week with an aerial bombing campaign. Turkey says the offensive is against ISIS-held areas along the border. But Turkey says it's also concerned about Syrian Kurdish militias at the border. Those militias are backed by the United States. On Wednesday, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan announced Turkish-backed Syrian rebels reclaimed the Syrian town of Jarablus from the Islamic State.
As of this moment, Free Syrian Army and residents of Jarablus have taken back Jarablus. They have seized the state buildings and official institution buildings in the town. According to the information we have received, Daesh had to leave Jarablus.
Turkey's offensive is dubbed Euphrates Shield, and it's the country's first major military operation since a failed coup shook Turkey in July. On Wednesday, the Turkish President Erdogan met with U.S. Vice President Joe Biden, who said the United States supports Turkey's efforts to control its borders.
We believe very strongly that the Turkish border must be controlled by Turkey, that there should be no occupation of that border by any group whatsoever, other than Syria that must be whole and united, but not carved in little pieces.
Meanwhile, the British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says videos posted to a social media website Thursday depict carnage in the Bab al-Narab neighborhood of Aleppo, where 2 barrel bombs were reportedly dropped, killing at least 5 people. The group also reported additional strikes across Aleppo and its suburbs, saying the dead were mostly women and children.
The strikes came as the United Nations announced Russia has agreed to a 48-hour humanitarian truce in Aleppo to permit aid deliveries, pending security guarantees are met by parties on the ground. The United Nations has been pushing for a weekly 48-hour hiatus in fighting in Aleppo to assist the city's approximately 2 million people who've been suffering as Syria's 5-year-old conflict continues to take a massive humanitarian toll. A separate United Nations team has concluded the Assad government and ISIS militants carried out repeated chemical weapons attacks in Syria in 2014 and 2015. The report accuses Assad of twice using chlorine gas. It also accuses ISIS of using mustard gas.
All of this comes as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, are meeting today in Geneva to discuss details of cooperation agreement on fighting Islamic State in Syria. For more, we're joined by the acclaimed scholar who's followed the region closely for years, Vijay Prashad. He's professor of international studies at Trinity College, columnist for the Indian magazine Frontline. His new book is called The Death of the Nation and the Future of the Arab Revolution. Professor Prashad's previous books include Arab Spring, Libyan Winter, and the Poorer Nations, A Possible History of the Global South. Vijay Prashad, welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you in studio.
Thanks a lot. It's great to be here.
So let's start with what's happening right now in Turkey, where Vice President Joe Biden just was.
Well, the situation in Turkey is very dire. As you know, on July 15th, there was the failed coup. But matters in Turkey have unraveled long before this failed coup. The crackdown on reporters has been going on for at least a year and a half, if not longer. The internal politics of Turkey has been in disarray. And one of the interesting things about the government of Mr. Erdogan is that previously he had started a peace process with the Kurdish Workers' Party, the PKK, which the United States and Turkey sees as a terrorist outfit. They had started a protracted peace process called the Imrali process. But this war in Syria has essentially unraveled that peace process, and the Turkish military has gone back on the full offensive against the Kurds in southeastern Turkey. And as well, as you saw this week, the Turkish army has crossed the border into Syria to stop the advance of Syrian Kurds from creating what the Syrian Kurds call Rojava, which would be a statelet of Syrian Kurds, which is right on the Turkish border. You know, the reason that operation is called Euphrates Shield is that the Euphrates runs in that region from north to south. And what the Turkish government would like to see is for the Syrian Democratic Forces, which has a large Kurdish component, to move back east of the Euphrates. In other words, withdraw from Jarablus, withdraw from Manbij, which they had taken quite celebrated victory, and therefore prevent the creation of this Kurdish statelet called Rojava. On the surface, they say it's about ISIS, but really this is about the protracted war that the Turkish government has begun again against the Kurds.
But interestingly, you mentioned the failed coup. The New York Times, for instance, is reporting today that that Erdogan wanted to go into Syria earlier, but the military was resisting, and it was only as a result of his being able to purge and remove so many top military officers that now he's been able to effect this incursion.
This is likely the case, but it's also been the situation that this is not the first Turkish entry into Syria. The Turks had entered Syria previously. The Turkish military had. There's a celebrated shrine, a memorial to one of the founders of the Ottoman Empire, and the Turkish military had entered to secure that monument earlier. Turks had also, of course, kept their border open and had allowed supplies and people to cross the border into various proxy groups, whether it's Turkish-backed proxy groups, Saudi groups, Qatari groups, and in fact the Islamic State. They have used for years the Turkish border. And I think that the sheer instability of the war in Syria has returned, the conflict into Turkey. What the CIA, after the successful coup in Iran in 1953, called blowback. This is, in a sense, blowback against Turkey. So they have previously entered Syria with the military. They have, of course, supported their proxies. But now, I think, with the gains made by the Kurds, this is as much a political entry as anything. The principal reason, I would argue, that they've entered Jarablus is to stop the creation of Rojava.
We're talking to Vijay Prashad, and we're going to continue this conversation after break. Vijay Prashad is professor of international studies at Trinity College, columnist for the Indian magazine Frontline. His new book is called The Death of the Nation and the Future of the Arab Revolution. We'll talk about, Turkey, Syria, Libya, and also the U.S. elections. Before we speak with Emma Thompson, the famed actress is now back in Canada after going to the Arctic. Stay with us.